There is a very short paragraph in the Parsha that has a very interesting distinction of being bracketed. It's very familiar verses. We recite them whenever we take the Torah out. But they are, it's an unusual thing to find any kind of punctuation in a Torah scroll. Let me just share it with you. What it has is that upside down nun at the beginning and upside down nun at the end, which clearly is there to kind of make it stand out from what precedes it, what follows it, and we're going to come back to, why it's there. But let's have a look at the actual content before we can see why it's bracketed in that manner. So we're familiar with this because these are the verses that we say when we open the ark to take the Torah out before Torah reading, and once again when we open the ark at the end of the Torah reading, respectively, Moshe, and when the ark was to set out, that's when the Jews traveled. The ark traveled ahead of them, but also when the Jews went out to war, then the ark led the way into battle, so it could be interpreted in both ways. And the words were "Kuma Hashem," arise, God, or advance, Hashem. May your enemies be scattered. May your foes flee before you. When it halted, he would say that when it halted, he would say, when it returned, when it rested, when it rested, return Hashem, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands. So our custom has become that when we take the Torah out for reading, on removing it from the ark, we read that first verse, and on taking it back at the end of the Torah reading, we say the second of those two words. Now let's just put that into context. Where are we? We are at the point where the Jews are preparing for the conquest of the Holy Land. In fact, they're about to enter. Of course, we know now, because we've read the book until the end, that it doesn't turn out that way, exactly as was planned. But as they stand now, the portion of Ba'alotcha, the Jews are poised to enter into the land. They're 3 days away. I mean, they're in the desert by Mount Sinai. We all know the geography. It doesn't take very long to get into the land of Canaan. Of course, it doesn't work out that way at all. Rather, we have one crisis after another, and the crisis begin in our parsha with various rebellions, with various murmurings. I'm going to come back to it soon, and then it comes to a crunch in next week's parsha, which is Shlach, and that's where we have the major breakdown with the spies and the decree of the 40 years. And by the time we get 2 portions later to Chukat, the 40 years are up and we're carrying on. So basically, if one had to subtitle the second half of the parsha, it would be Things Fall Apart. From a nation that is together, that stood at Mount Sinai, ready to conquer the Holy Land, ready to accept the Torah, and ready to move on to that next challenge of moving away from the desert into inhabited land and becoming a nation. So things fall apart very quickly, and we end up with an entire generation staying in the desert. That's as a result of the various crises, rebellions, etc. It's only a year later. They spent 1 year at the foot of Mount Sinai. They're going to be ordered to travel on the 20th of Sivan. That's actually the anniversary date's in a couple of days away. They're going to be ordered to move on and leave Mount Sinai. They arrived there the previous year on the first day of Sivan. That was a famous date which we always remember as the date when the Jews are referred to in the singular, because there was that amazing unity among them. Now we are 1 year and 20 days later, and things are really not going the way they should go. And let's look at some of that in a few moments. So up until this point, they're entering Israel, and this is part of the kind of war cry, rallying cry that Moshe shares with them. That is, when we go out to war, we're going to say, "Let's go for it. Let's conquer the land. That the ark's going to go ahead of us, and the enemies are just going to scatter in front of us," which was that was plan A. They were just going to enter the land, and the ark would be there, and the Canaanites would kind of look at this and turn on their heels and run away and scatter. That would have been a very easy conquest. It didn't turn out that way at all, because by the time they did eventually begin the conquest, it was Joshua, and it was war after war and battle after battle. And it was a totally very different picture. So this is the instruction. So go. Conquer the land. Of course, that changes slightly. And then when the ark comes to rest, there's a second prayer, and there is Shuva Hashem, return God. That is a request for Hashem's Shekhinah to remain with us, not that He be with us only in times of battles and wars when we absolutely need Him, and also let's just add when we absolutely pray to Him all the time, because we're in a situation of challenge and stress, and upset, even when things calm down, we want Hashem to remain with us and to rest among us. Others interpret this second verse as a prayer by the people who go out to war, that they come back, literally. Hashem, make us come back in our myriads and our thousands. Others interpret it as a prayer for there to be peace in the camp. Now that we've looked at the stuff between the brackets, let's look at the brackets and try to understand why they're there. And let's look at what commentators have to say. Of course, the first place we're going to go is Rashi. Where is Rashi? Rashi will be here. Rashi. And Rashi says the following. There are dividing marks, says Rashi, in front and behind it, to indicate that this is not the correct place. It would be more fitting to place it in a section dealing with the march of the people. That was a parasha or two ago, chapter 2, verse 17, etc. Why is it written here? In order, says Rashi, and he's commenting here on the Talmud, quoting here from the Talmud Shabbat, to make a break between the narrative of one punishment and that of another punishment, and that's stated in the Talmudic chapter of the Tractate Shabbat called Kitvei. So if we look there, we actually find that Rashi is opting for one of two interpretations there. That is, here. Talmud first quotes the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, I think we'll come back to that. So the Holy One, blessed be He, made signs in the Torah for this portion, above and below, and it was before and after that, to say this is not in its place, as a previous portion does not discuss the nation's travels. So it's out of context. Rabbi Yehuda Anasi says it's not for that reason that signs were inserted. Signs were inserted there because this portion is considered a book unto itself. That is, as he explains, quoting a verse in Proverbs that says she carved its 7 pillars, and that's a reference to 7 books of the Torah. But now, where are the 7 books in the Torah? We only know 5 books in the Torah. So what's the 7 books in the Torah? And Shmuel Bar Nachman says this is actually according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi that we just read, because he says that little portion, 2-verse portion, is actually a book of its own. It's a book of its own, so there's 7 books, because we have Breshit, Shmot, Vayikra, and then Bamidbar now is 3 books, right? the first part until when the ark traveled, and then the actual portion when the ark traveled, which is its own book, as we said, and then the remainder of Numbers and Deuteronomy. So that gives you 5 books, but 4 books, and 3 books, or 7 books. So for some reason, the Torah actually doesn't comprise just 5 books. It's actually 7, with the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, being divided into 3. So that's Rabbi Nassi's opinion. Shimon Gamliel says no. The portion doesn't belong here. And one day it's gonna return back to its own place. I don't know how books, how portions of the Torah travel, but apparently, the future versions of the Torah will have it written in its proper place. So why is it here? And the answer is to demarcate between the first punishment and the second punishment. And of course, that is the view of Rashi, and he opts for Shimon ben Gamliel here to say that this is why we have these brackets. What is the first punishment and the second punishment? What are we talking about over here? So, as I mentioned, we get into the stage where, the things are falling apart. The Jews are starting to rebel. They're starting to murmur. They're starting to say terrible things. And so here's the first one. Here's the first one. It says they marched on the mountain of Hashem a distance of 3 days. This is, as I said, 20th of Sivan. Where have they been until now? Until now, they have been at Mount Sinai. And this is how the Talmud describes their departure. First punishment, they traveled from the mountain of Hashem for 3 days. And Rab Chanina said, they turned from after God and hurriedly fled Mount Sinai. So they were told to travel. That wasn't the question. The question was, how do you leave? And in fact, there's a medrash that describes it. Tosafot on that piece of Gemara actually adds it. Tinok haboreach me'beit hasefer, like a child who runs away from school. In other words, they wanted to get away from Sinai. I mean, Sinai was a place where, well, we got the Torah, but with Torah came many restrictions, and kind of they were afraid that if they stayed there a bit longer, there'd be more laws, more restrictions. We end up with 613 plus. So they kind of, as soon as the first instruction came, we're leaving Sinai, they ran away with glee, like a child who's bunking school, always leaving school at the end of the day. Those of us who've been in the classroom know that anything you try to teach or to say to children after the bell has rung, you might as well waste your time, because they might still physically be there, and they may know that you've told them previously, if you dare close your book until I've dismissed the class, I'm going to, have whatever consequences are appropriate in your teaching style. Well, the fact remains that once that bell is rung, the kids have checked out. And this is what happened there at Mount Sinai. The bell rang, and the Jews bolted, and they were no longer there. So that's considered a negative thing. To leave Mount Sinai with that kind of attitude was not seen as correct. And there are more things that happen in the Parsha. There are more calamities. So this is the leaving Mount Sinai, and then just a bit after that, just after the brackets, is the people took to complaining bitterly before Hashem. The text doesn't clearly say what the complaint was. Hashem heard, was incensed. A fire of Hashem broke out against them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. So that's another rebellion, another murmuring. And then there's a third one, and the third one being the complaint about the food, the manna. They're not happy with the way it tastes, the way it looks. And they long back for Egypt, where they could get all kinds of foods that the manna cannot be made to taste like. So it was, so we have 3 instances of murmuring. And Rashi says it doesn't reflect well to go from one to the other, what Rab Shimon in the Gemara, which Rashi quotes, and therefore we have a break. we have a break to separate between, the one instance of the inappropriate behavior and the other to kind of soften the harshness of it all. And so a portion that is completely out of context is placed there, even though it does not really belong there. So that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, as I said, which Rashi quotes. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, he takes another view and he says it is solely to create that 7 pillars of Torah. So those are the 2 opinions. Why the nun? Why the upside down nun? To create either the bracket to say it doesn't belong here, or this is a book of its own. Well, the kind of most obvious and simplest answer would be these are brackets. They kind of best resemble the type of typographical character we use when we want to create a separation. We use the round brackets. The square brackets have a different function. So that's how we take something which we call parenthetical, doesn't really belong there, and that's how that portion is separated. Other commentaries point to the nun as the initial letter of nosim, to travel, as Vayi bin Aaron, when the ark traveled. So that nun signifies travel, and because this, to say that really this portion belongs some paragraphs back with the stories of the travels of the Jewish people, so it's a nun. There's another opinion that says nun is the letter 50. And if you count the number of paragraphs in the Torah from the beginning of the book of Bamidbar to here, it's 50 paragraphs. This would seem to indicate and support the view of Rabbi Shimon that we mentioned earlier, that this is the correct place for it, for now. And it's there, sorry, Rabbi Nasi, that says that it's to divide the Torah. It belongs where it is. That's why, the 50 represents the 50 paragraphs that they're there until now. But there's another allusion in the letter Nun. And here I refer you to a famous psalm that we recite, 145, is Ashrei Yoshevetecha Tilal David, where all the letters of the alphabet are there, one verse below the other. I think in the Old School Siddur they've put it very neatly with the initial letter bold, which makes it very easy to spot a missing letter, namely the Nun. So King David, who composed that psalm, omitted a line with Nun, because Nun is from the word nofel, or to fall. And of course, King David was very aware of his own personal downfall, and many of the Psalms of Tehillim actually deal with his process of recognizing that his behavior was untoward and that he had a great major fall. But unlike Humpty Dumpty, he could put it together. And he spent a lot of time in effort in prayer, in teshuvah, to pull himself together from what he saw as his personal downfall. So he omits the letter nun, which would hint to no fail, to fall. But if you look at the next verse, Someich Hashem l'chol noflim, so we've got the word nofel, noflim in the plural. So there's still the allusion to the fall, but in a positive sense of Hashem supports those who have fallen, and that's his life story, where he had this downfall, and he somehow managed to pull himself out of it. So similarly here, we are hinting to a nefilah, to a downfall of the Jewish people. And how is that? By actually having a nun that is upside down, hinting to the downfall. Amazingly, I heard the following interpretation. Nun, the word nun, 50, or the letter nun, also means a fish. a fish. Nunei hayam. We normally, in more modern Hebrew, talk about a dag, but nun is a classical word for fish. So something went wrong here with the fish, and this is an allusion to the famous parable of Rabbi Akiva and the Jewish nation being compared to fish in water. The parable goes that Rabbi Akiva was living under Roman times when teaching of Torah in public was strictly prohibited, and he persisted. He had a Roman friend who said, my friend Akiva, it doesn't make sense what you're doing. You're going to get caught. You're going to get killed. Why don't you desist from this? And he says, no, the Jews are fish. The water is Torah. So yes, hanging out in the water is risky, because there are fishermen's nets, and you can get caught, and you can, it's not good. On the other hand, leaving the water is, definitely the end of the line for the Jewish people, and this is the parable he uses. He says, Jews in Torah is like water in fish. It's the environment in which we can thrive, we can grow, we can survive. Take us out of there, and we're going to cease to be able to continue to thrive and live within a very, very quick period of time. And therefore we cannot lead, and therefore I will continue to teach Torah even at the risk of my own life. Yes, I could get caught in the fisherman's net, but at least have a chance of survival. So that's the concept of fish in the water. And what's alluded to here with the nun upside down is that the Jews kind of left Sinai. That's the idea of leaving the nurturing, the warm environment, and running away from it. And so, because the verse just before that talks about the departure from Sinai, the upside down nun is alluding to the fact that they had this downfall, which was the fish that is not where it belongs, and they obviously couldn't stay at Sinai forever. They had to move on, and they'd been there for a long time, for a full year. They had to move on to the next stage in their journey, their national journey, and their personal journeys. But they had to leave Sinai, but they had to keep Sinai within them. And what they were doing with this attitude of a baby running away from school, a child running away from school, was actually kind of shedding, trying to get, Sinai out of them. And that's why it's the upside down nun to signify the fish out of its element, and not there. So it still needs to be touched upon is why would this verse, these two verses, form a book of its own in the Torah? What is the absolute special importance that has been granted to these two verses? Interestingly, I found this in the Kli Yakar, and he comments on the number. How many Jews are there? We said Hashem return in your myriads and thousands. So if you say myriads and thousands, that would be 22,000. A myriad is 10,000. So myriads, that's 20,000, and thousands would be a minimum of 2,000. And there is a statement in the Talmud that for Hashem's presence to rest, he has to be surrounded by 22,000 souls or angels. You may remember that number going back a couple of parshas, when there was a census of the tribe of Levi, and how many Levites were there from the age of 1 month and up? 22,000. And those were going to take the place of the firstborn, because the Levites were taking place of it. So there was a census, and that's what that number comes out. So that's tribe of Levi, which is the foundation upon which Hashem rests on the Jewish people. They're in the holy tabernacle, and so that's that number of 22,000, and its relevance and why that number? I don't know. It has some kind of a mystical significance, but I'm not sure. Kli Yakar says this. He says, this portion is here to tell us the importance of procreation, the importance of Jews bringing Jewish soul into the world. And by saying God is going to rest upon a Jewish people, when there is that number of 22,000, it's actually implying that if somebody is remiss in that their contribution to the continuity of the Jewish people, then they are not inviting God upon us. So that's what Kli Yakar sees that little paragraph as a Torah on its own, because that precept of human continuity is central. It's mitzvah number one, pru urvu, to be fruitful and to multiply, and it's placed here in the middle core of the Torah, in book number, would that be 4 of 6? 4 of 7, the central one. No. Yeah, would be the middle one. No, it would not be. We have Bereshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar is book 5 of 7. So pretty much close to the middle. And that is a core teaching of how to bring the Shekhinah to continue to rest upon us. Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.